Hello everyone, this is LockOS and welcome to DCS World. So in today's video we're going over the A-4E's options in the mission editor, which are, thankfully or not, depends on how complex your aircraft, a little bit more limited than the A-4E, but we still have quite a lot of fun with this aircraft, because it has a couple of really unique weapons that nothing else has. So, we're going to start off over here on the payload panel right down here. Standard options for fuel. Don't be dissuaded by that small amount of fuel. The A-4E does not have an afterburner for its engine, so this fuel actually does go quite a long ways. And there's plenty of options for fuel tanks later on, so don't worry about this small amount of internal fuel. The A-4E doesn't really burn a huge amount. Down below we have options for chaff and flare. They can be adjusted in buckets of 30, so you can either go for 0 chaff, 60 flare, a balance 30-30, or 60 chaff, 0 flares. Kind of like some other aircraft in the game. You can change your gun ammunition down here, and you can go for a combat mix, high explosive incendiary, or an APT. The A-4E, by the way, kind of unique for some aircraft in DCS, especially on the American side. They don't use Vulcan guns. They actually use revolver cannons, and there's a pair of Colt, I believe they're Colt revolver cannons on the right at the wing root, right below the engine nacelle here. And these are 20mm cannons, so they are not by any means shabby. Again, you might have heard this on a couple of later videos. Combat Mech is good if you don't know what you're putting yourself into, or if you're just engaging just general ground targets on the fly, like an online server. If you have a bit more of a better idea and you want to tune your rounds a bit more, high explosive incendiary is good for unarmored or very lightly armored. And armor piercing target is good for anything that has a moderate amount of armor. And again, preamble, I always say this, there are units in DCS that don't appear like they have a lot of armor, but they do. So, especially if you're going to be engaging anything that looks like moderately armored, go for APT. Other than that, we're now going to get to our pylons here. Thankfully, there are only 5 pylons to cover, so it should be a short section here. 1 and 5 are matched, and those are your outboards. 2 and 4 are your inboard wings. And you have a centerline 3 pylon, which is where some of the really interesting options are. So, 1, air-to-air missiles. You have your AIM-9B, which is otherwise known as the GAR-8, which is the first Sidewinder variant. And then you have your P and P5. If you can, mount the P5. Otherwise, mount the best available option. The A-4 is not primarily an air-to-air aircraft, but it is pretty nimble, and with a pair of Sidewinders, it can actually be a reasonable threat if you are pretty good at flying the A-4E. So, do keep in mind that this is not a bad option if you need a bit of self-protection capability. You also have the infamous Shrike. It's a little bit harder to use, I believe, in this than in the F4E, but I haven't actually fired the Shrike from an A4 since the Shrike got updated for the F4E, so who knows, there might actually be better guidance here. And again, keep in mind, go to the yellow triangle and set your guidance up here if you're going to use a Shrike on the A4E to make sure you're attacking the right target. You set your target here in the RF guidance unit, so you can mount different guidance or secret heads to attack various targets. And again, you set your attack profile, and for the lower and upper RF limits, don't mess with them. Just keep it simple. Other than that, we now have bombs. We have a bunch of World War II vintage bombs down here in the AN series. And a lot of them are fairly tiny, but you can mount them if you wish. You have your Mark 20 Rockeye, which is your anti-tank cluster bomb with high explosive anti-tank bomblets. Your Mark 77s are, believe it or not, improvised napalm canisters. That's what the Mark 77s were. They were sort of they were very much an improvised bomb, and then the Navy, the various forces standardized them over the years. But that's your quote-unquote napalm, is the Mark 77, which is unique to the A-4E. It doesn't have quite realistic, there's no napalm effect, but it acts like a napalm bomb. Then you have your Mark 81s, which are your small 250-pound bombs. You even have Mark 81 Snake Eyes, if you really want to do that. And then you have your good old standard Mark 82s. Can't go wrong with those ever. And you have those in your regular low drag and snake eye high drag variants. And then you have your infamous, or rather my infamous, LL2 target marker flares. If you want to do a night mission and you want to eliminate the target area, you have night marker flares here. For pods, you have your smoke winders, for if you want to do air show stuff, and then you have your infamous rocket pods. You have your Lao 3 and 68 for your 19 and 7 count rocket pods, and you have those in your various smoke, high explosive anti-tank variants. Also, with the 7 count 68, you do have an option for a 7mm Hydra or 70mm folding fin 7mm Hydra illuminator rounds. And again, these are your Hydra slash 70mm slash 2.75 inch rockets all down here. And then you have my favorite rocket pod, which is the Lao 10, which carries your 127mm Zunis, which are your which is your way more powerful high explosive rocket. I prefer the Zunis over the 2.75 inch rockets down here. They tend to have a bit more firepower. They tend to you don't need to hold down the fire button for as long because it's only 4 rockets, but these 4 rockets with the much larger warhead pack quite a punch, and they're just fun in general. They produce a bigger explosion. I like the Zunis. They're one of my guilty pleasures of DCS to use. So we'll mount Zunis up there, and then I'll mount them on your side just because we can. Going on to the inboard wing pylons. Again, same sidewinders, same strike. Slightly bigger bomb selection. You can carry an insane amount of these smaller World War II vintage bombs on these larger racks. I don't really know how much they really do in DCS world, but you can if you want to. You can also start mounting some of the more larger bombs, like the Mark 77 Mark 0. And also you can start mounting the 83 and the 84 if you really want a lot of firepower. You can also mount quite a lot of the smaller bombs. So you can you can mount like 2 Mark 82s here on the wingtip on these inboard pylons, and you can even again mount like 5 Mark 81s if you want to do that. So you have quite a lot of options to mount some of the more heavier hitting weapons here on the inboard pylons. Fuel tanks. This is where you can start mounting your fuel tanks. There's a nice little 150-gallon tank. That's relatively lightweight, but gives you a decent bit of range. I usually tend to always mount, if I want to do any kind of mission with any kind of like duration, I do mount 2 of these 150-gallon tanks on the wingtips, and that actually, believe it or not, gives me quite enough range. It gives me enough range to basically go quite a long time on most servers. This is definitely a really good option if you want fuel for like most of your missions in the DCS. I've pretty much almost never run out of fuel or come close to running out with a 150-gallon tank on 2 and 4. And they're relatively smaller too, so there's less drag. You can also, if you really need the fuel for like a ferry mission, or if you're really going to be doing like a super long strike and you don't want to refuel, you can go to 2 300-gallon tanks on the wingtips. That's kind of excessive because you can already see right here, you've almost doubled your fuel weight just doing that. So do keep in mind that's a bit excessive, but if you really need to go far, you can do that. Also, you can start mounting dispenser pods here. So again, similar to the Phantom, you have the CBU dispenser pods, and they have different dispensers with different bomblets. I won't go over all of those, because there's quite a lot of them, and you can mount them in either a single or a double pair for just absolute mayhem. And then you can get to one I love, one of my favorite things to use on this aircraft. You have the Mark IV Hypeg, which is a gun pod. So this is a 20mm Vulcan gun pod that the A-4s use. And you can mount them on the inboard pylons here. And you can mount your smoke winders, and then you have options for all the same rockets on the outboard, but you can mount them in greater quantity. So instead of mounting just 1 Zuni pod, you can now mount 2. Center pylon. You can mount even more bombs. The bomb load just keeps on increasing. For instance, you can mount up to 3 Mark 83s. for an insane payload on the center pylon. You can only still mount only one Mark 84, but 3 Mark 83s is quite a lot as is. You can also mount your target marker flares, and again, pretty much every single bomb that you can mount anywhere else, you can mount here on the center pylon. You can mount a total of 6 Mark 82s here as well. That's another fun option for a bomb. So basically all the bombs, just more of them. You can mount a 150 gallon, 300 gallon, and a 400 gallon tank on the center line pylon. So you can also go for that as an option as well. If you just want to mount one single tank, you can mount one huge 400 gallon tank down the middle. You can also mount, again, you can mount another gun pod, so you can theoretically have 3 gun pods, which is something I've done on a server, something I've done on a sortie or two on a server, and it's a ton of fun to just fly in with 3 gun pods. Not gonna lie, the whole screen lights up. It's fun, but it's not like super useful. That's not like super useful in like most cases because it's kind of overkill to carry that much gun ammo. Other than that, we have more rocket pods, and again, you can carry just increasing amounts of more rockets. So you can carry up to, for instance, 3 of the Lao 19. Sorry, 3 of the Lao 3 pods, which are 19 rockets each, for a total of 57 rockets just in this container underneath the aircraft. Or you can do what my favorite thing to do is, and go for a total of 3 Zuni pods. So theoretically, you could actually have a A-4E with a grand total of 36 Zunis, which is both hilarious and fun. So you definitely have options for unguided ordnance in the A4E. You can carry quite a lot of it. However, I will note that going over here, the problem is with the A4E is you have to be very careful about what you pick out for your loadout, because if you notice, it's very easy. It's relatively easy, unlike another aircraft, to overweight the A4E. And if you're taking off from a land airstrip at 100% of its capacity, over 100% of its capacity, or even close to 100% of its capacity, it does get a bit long. It does get a bit hard to take off, just because you need quite a lot of runway to take off or land with that much weight. So do keep in mind, if you're operating off of a land base, especially, you don't want to keep the weight relatively contained. Because the A4E does not have an afterburner, it cannot produce a lot of thrust. It's relying entirely on mill thrust, and it's a reasonably powerful engine, but it's not that powerful for like land takeoffs when it's heavily loaded. So do keep that in mind. That being said, you can get away with quite a lot of interesting loadouts. So you can do something like this, and you still have a total of 16 Zunis, plus the gun ammo, and quite a bit of fuel, and you're already coming in at a more reasonable 93% of total mass. And if you keep it around 90, 95, under 95, you'll have pretty good handling characteristics on takeoff. I would definitely have enough thrust to start gaining speed and altitude when you pull up, and you won't run into any low-lying buildings or trees up in front of you. So about 90% is pretty good, 93%, especially because you will actually burn a decent bit during taxi. Not a ton of fuel, but the A4E is a little bit squirrely in its taxiing, so it does taxi a bit slower. So you're going to spend quite a bit of time burning internal fuel on the ground. Not a ton, but a little bit. So your weight's probably going to be closer to 92%. And that's it for the A4E. Really, the only thing I could really recommend for the A4E and just in loadouts in general is have fun with dumb unguided ordnance. There's lots of rockets, lots of bombs you can pick from. Generally, stick to one or two weapon types on the A4E. You do have a lot of options for unguided ordnance, which can be fun, but because the A4E has sort of a manual weapons control system, and you have to flop a lot of switches and do a lot of things like that, generally stick to one weapon type and then just use that so you can make your one pass, and then switch to the second weapon type on your second pass if you need to. So do keep that in mind. and you'll be pretty good for tuning your weapons. Just again, stick to 1 or 2 weapon types, because you'll have 1 or 2 weapon types, and then your internal guns, and you'll be fine. You won't be too overwhelmed with choice. Plus, I should also mention, since there's no MFD really in the cockpit, there's no way to tell what you have mounted on the aircraft other than going into an external view. So if you kind of want to keep things relatively simple, don't bother with too many faffing around with too many weapon options. So probably made that point quite a few times, because that's really it. Because other than that, we have radio settings. Again, you want to set up all your radio channels here for your presets for your pilot. Make sure your pilot has all the presets they need set up here. There is an option to set up a manual frequency in the cockpit, but it's an older aircraft. You don't want to give people too much poor workload. Just set up your channels. And then you have some interesting options here. You can remove the ECM control panel. So there is actually a ECM control panel that sits on the, can't really see it from the exterior view, but it sits right here. And that's for it's sort of an add-on module that they created for jammers and other things. So you can remove it if you want to simulate a bit of an older aircraft or one that wasn't dedicated to seed work. But I would generally just keep it on there for most of the time, because the A-4E is going to struggle in a bit more modern scenarios. So you want to keep the ECM control panel there. Because in most cases you want the A-4E to have a bit more survivability in a more modern setting if you're doing more of those kind of missions or servers. But if you're doing a historical one, you can totally remove it. It's an option it gives you. It does, I believe, I do believe that does remove, however, the ability for the you're not going to get any good information for your strikes, and it does remove your RWR and your jammer. So do keep in mind that if you do remove it, you're losing your jammer, your RWR, and I do believe you might also lose the ability to use strikes effectively. You might be able to use strikes, but not quite as effectively. Automatic catapult power mode. Basically, this is a way that the devs of the A-4E module were able to get the A-4E to take off from carriers in the past. You don't really need to use it right now, but if you want to have fun with it, you can enable it here. Enable night vision. Basically, this allows the pilot to equip night vision goggles and use them in the aircraft. You can have this enabled or disenabled for historical campaigns, and then you can set up your you can set up the dispenser, the bomb dispenser pods. You can set up them here with the CBU tubes per pulse, and then the different for the A and then the BA for how many tubes you want to fire off per pulse that you fire off. And then you have the countermeasure burst intervals, and then salvos and salvo intervals. So that's pretty much it for your A-4E setup and tutorial here. Do keep in mind that the A-4E for your missions is a very much an older aircraft. It's very much a post-Korea, early Vietnam era aircraft. So don't throw too many modern threats against it in missions and expect it to survive, unless you have really good terrain masking. That's going to be your best bet for designing missions with this in a more modern scenario. But if you want to do a more historical scenario, have a blast with this aircraft. It's a lot of fun. But again, keep in mind, AAA and the earlier SA2 and SA3 is going to be the primary threat, so that this is going to be meant to defend against. So with that in mind, this is Loco S signing out from DCS World in the A-4E. Have a lot of fun, and until next time, see you around.